It is 3 and Out on this Monday all across the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Kevin Thomas, BJ Bennett, Ben Troop off today. He'll be back with us tomorrow on the show. But we have so much to get to. Of course, the fallout of the College Football Playoff Committee talking about a 12-team playoff that is expected to be proposed and approved this week. And then, of course, it gets down to the nitty-gritty of the fine print, the TV networks, and what exactly all that means. So we'll debate some of that coming up on the show. Also chat with Tommy Bowden, two-time ACC Coach of the Year, also undefeated back in 1998 with the Tulane Green Wave. So he knows a little bit about what is now a G5 school going undefeated and just kind of being there. So we'll talk to you about that. A lot of coaches have sounded off about the new 12-team proposed playoff, and we'll get some of their comments on the show as well. So plenty to get to on that front in regards to college football, BJ. But coming out of the weekend, disappointing time down in South Florida for the Atlanta Braves. 13 saves on the year, 11 blown saves. So you're almost 50-50 there. When is it okay to say the Braves are just okay, and they are what they are at this point?
I mean, I think you can say that now. Now, that doesn't mean that Atlanta can't turn it around, can't improve, can't get better. I still think there's a lot of talent on the Braves roster, but you're right. I think that was the key word from this weekend. I think entering the weekend, you felt like even though your previous games against the Marlins didn't really go well, you thought, hey, on paper, we're probably better than Miami, a chance to get some momentum, move forward. You had moved, back close within having a winning record, and then goes the other direction for you. But Kevin, I'm looking at this, and we always talk about in sports kind of the law of averages and how you're fighting the numbers. Well, for a couple of years now, the Braves have been, prior to the start of this season, really elite in late game situations, right? It was kind of the magic of the team is that 8th inning, 9th inning, extra innings, the Braves were going to find a way. And it was everybody on the roster from, Freddie Freeman to Dansby Swanson to, closer by committee and all kind of stuff. And you've seen the reverse of that this year. And I don't know if it's something that's going to bounce back in the other direction, but check out these numbers. So right now in games that you measure stats from the 9th inning or later. So all season, the Atlanta Braves in the 9th inning or extra innings, they are hitting 145 offensively. That is last in Major League Baseball by a significant margin. So you're not putting the ball in play. In the 9th inning or later, so 9th inning or extra innings, your team ERA is 4.33. That is second to last in the National League behind only the Reds, who are having like a historically bad season in those situations. So you have been basically the worst team in baseball in late game situations. And I know, you can look at the starters and Drew Smiley and some guys not living up to expectations. You can look at the bullpen, which has not been good. You're 26th in bullpen ERA this year. But to me, you look at these late game situations. We saw it against the Phillies. We saw it against the Marlins. You're not able to come through. And that's the difference in being 3, 4, 5 games above 500, 3, 4, 5 games below 500.
And again, as you said, I think that's important to note that over the last 3 years, the Braves were not just good, but they were the best team in Major League Baseball over the last 3 seasons in late game situations. I think number 2, no surprise, was the Dodgers. And surprise, surprise, they've been in the World Series and won a World Series during that time. So, look, I just think you look at certain teams sometimes and you say, is this a trend that is going to continue? I mean, you look at any sport. Hey, the Golden State Warriors are the best 3-point shooting team in history. Well, how long is that going to continue? Like, are they just forever going to be the best 3-point shooting team? And if they're winning a lot of games because of it, when it goes the other direction a little bit, how do they overcome that? And I think for the Braves, that to me has been the biggest swing that you have seen. One, they've gone from polar opposites. The best team in Major League Baseball in late and close situations, nobody better, to literally there's almost nobody worse. They've gone from the top of the heap to almost underneath the pile. They're so bad. And again, I think that is one thing that can't be discounted. And that's not even taking into consideration, BJ, all the injuries that they've suffered, the bad luck, the Marcell Ozuna injury, and then arrest. So you haven't had a roster that I think you felt comfortable with really all season long. from start to finish. But I think that one is a key one, that in close and late situations, and if you took the time to expound that out, I would imagine they're pretty bad after the 8th inning as well in Major League Baseball. But they've gone from one of the best, or not one of the best, in all of baseball for 3 years to the worst in pretty much all of those late and close categories. So they're not winning any of the close games they normally kind of pulled in their favor.
And the one-run losses are really tough. And I think they're really tough on the team, too. You know, we think about this with basketball, and you know, we'll joke around the office, like if your favorite team loses by a buzzer beater, you'll go, oh, man, I'd rather lose by 10 or 12. You know, I'd rather my basketball team lose by 10 or 12 than lose on a last-second shot. And it's, you know, with the Braves, when you lose by 1, or you had the numbers about the blown saves, that's really difficult when it keeps happening. But I you know, Kevin, is it something, you kind of asked it there, that could turn back around potentially? I mean, I do think just given the talent on the roster and the fact that you've been one of the best teams in baseball for the last couple of years, you don't expect the Braves in late game situations for an entire season to bat 145. You don't expect with Shane Green now in the mix, and I know it was a bad start, but he's been good the last couple of times out. You don't expect the bullpen ERA to be up near 5 for the entire season. So potentially, could it turn back around? Maybe. Now, in the National League East, where you have the Mets playing really well, what does that mean? Can you turn it around to the extent where you can get back in the division race pretty quickly? I don't know. I do think it's an important couple of weeks coming up. You got the Red Sox tomorrow. Now, in a kind of a strange way, it seems like sometimes Atlanta has been better in kind of these spotlight series. So we'll see if that continues. But the bottom line is you got to get better bullpen pitching, and you got to be better late in games.
Certainly. And I look at this team too, and one thing we'll see, because it'll affect the Braves just like everybody else. But I'm interested to see, unlike most seasons where you're 162, I'm interested to see how teams fare, especially in late July, August, and into September, where we just passed, for most teams who don't have a bunch of games to make up, the entirety of the regular season of last year. So I think the Braves have played 63 games. I think maybe the Mets still have some games they got to make up due to rainouts. They might have a little less. I think the Nationals have a few less. But you're basically at the point across Major League Baseball where the season ended, and you still have 197 games in the Braves case, 97 more games. How do rosters hold up over that after having not have to do that in 2020 into 2021? It is a marathon, not a sprint in Major League Baseball. And you can see teams who fade significantly post All-Star break because they just run out of gas, and guys are pushing innings limits and are going farther than they're accustomed to. And I'll be very interested to see kind of the metrics and numbers across baseballs, especially post All-Star break, when you really start getting into heavy workloads that these guys haven't seen in 2 years because of the shortened 2020 season. So again, I'm not saying where the Braves are is favorable, BJ, but I'm interested to see if they can trend back in the right direction. If you see a number of teams start to trend down due to workload kind of catching up to them after, again, people forget, if you were not on a Major League roster, you essentially didn't play. You played minor league alternate site scrimmages, which aren't the same thing as playing Major League Baseball. I mean, no matter how much you want to try to set it up that way. So you have guys that essentially haven't played high-level baseball for 162 games in getting close to a year and a half, 2 years. So very interested to see what happens when we get to July, August, and into September. If you see some teams that right now look very good start to fade a little bit, and if you see an uptick from a team like the Atlanta Braves, which is kind of underachieved in a number of areas for the first half of the season.
And I understand when you talk about the Braves struggles, kind of the first bullpen, right? I mean, you talk about the bullpen, and we'll see what Shane Green can do. And I think Roles, in a strange way, even though we're in mid-June, still being kind of settled and decided. But when I look at Atlanta bouncing back, and you talk about kind of the course correction statistically, I'm looking at your veteran starting pitchers. And just for sake of argument, I'm going to throw Max Fried in there, not necessarily because he has multiple extended seasons, but because what we have seen has been so good up to this year. Right now, Charlie Morton's ERA is 4.50. Right now, Max Fried's ERA is 4.62. Right now, Drew Smiley's ERA is 5.63. If I would have told you that at the beginning of the season, I think we all would have looked around and gone, okay, the Braves probably are not going to be leading the division because those are your three kind of go-to guys, especially with Mike Soroka out. And then you think about Huascar Ynoa and his injury. It's really for stretches of this season been the young starting pitchers. Ian Anderson, for the most part, has been great. Ynoa was on track to probably be an all-star. Tucker Davidson has been really, really good. And we'll see what happens with those guys moving forward. But I think you've got to get better proficiency from your starters that are guys that have been around. And to your point, Kevin, Charlie Morton has been in the league for a decade and a half. He's been an all-star. He knows how to manage and deal with and kind of improve throughout a long season. Same for Drew Smyly. I know he doesn't have quite the resume of Charlie Morton, but he's been around the game. Max Fried certainly has. I think when you talk about improvement for the Atlanta Braves, you've got to trim those ERAs down and be more effective and be more efficient if you're Charlie Morton, Max Fried, Drew Smyly. And you mentioned something kind of crazy because, look, if we're being honest, Drew Smyly struggled for a good portion of this year, but I think your last couple of wins have come with him on the mound. So when you're in a long baseball season, you kind of have to compartmentalize the stats. And it's hard for me to do because when we say Drew Smyly, I go, oh my God, 4.7 ERA. But you kind of just move forward and hit the reset button, right? If Fried and Morton and Smyly can be better moving forward in terms of you improving from here on out, the previous struggles kind of don't matter. So when you talk about how do teams handle the extended season, I'm looking to your veteran starting pitchers.
Yeah, I'm interested to see who kind of steps up and kind of takes the reins in that role for Atlanta. Also, again, we'll get to this later in the show, but kind of the narratives that start to form when your team is underperforming by what expectations are. It's it's Brian Snitker's fault, or Freddie Freeman is unhappy because he doesn't have a contract extension and things of that nature, which I find kind of laughable that people want to lay it at the feet of Brian Snitker in one bad year when since he's taken over, the Braves have been really good in a number of areas. And by the way, have been in the playoffs, won a series, went a couple outs away from the World Series last year, that all of a sudden it's him who's not getting the job done despite the team's 215 or 220 batting average so far.
Yeah, I would not. I am not one who's sitting here saying make a change at manager. Now, do we all have moments where we're watching, listening to a game and go, why did that happen? Yes, but that happens in every sport. I mean, when you're watching Georgia football or the Falcons, how often do you go, I can't believe they ran that play, or I can't believe they weren't, more aware, in the Falcons case, they weren't more aware of what was happening, a couple of years ago in the Super Bowl. I think we all could look at the bullpen and go, maybe that wasn't the best decision, but that's watching it, listening to it from afar. I mean, let's not forget the Atlanta Braves. It had been a minute since they had won a playoff series, and you were a game away from the World Series a year ago. You've been the standard in the National League East. No manager is without criticism. No coach is without criticism. But I think Brian Snitker's done a very good job, and I would agree with you. To sit here after 60 games and say you're going to ignore division championships, plural, and say we got to make a change, I think that's a dramatic overreaction.
We'll talk more about the Braves coming up. Hawks tonight in State Farm Arena, Game 4 after just getting run out of the gym on Friday night. BJ, a quick minute on Atlanta. Do they have enough to bounce back, or has Philadelphia kind of cracked the code on how to run down the Atlanta Hawks here?
Well, I mean, I don't know that it's that. I think if we're being honest, Philadelphia is one of the best teams in the NBA. And I think Atlanta has played themselves into that conversation where the Hawks were and where the Hawks are remarkable. But I don't think there's, some sort of sudden shift necessarily. I just think Philly's really, really good. But I think Atlanta will be prepared. I think they'll be eager. I think they play well tonight.
We've got more to come here on 3 and Out. We'll talk some college football here in hour number 1. We'll look at who will be better, who will be worse, and who will be maybe about the same. We'll look at some units around Southern college football. And also we are seeing some coaches sound off on the proposed 12-team playoff model, kind of what their thoughts are. We'll have some comments from both Kirby Smart and Jamie Chadwell, who obviously have two varying ends of the spectrum as a P5 and a G5 head football coach. We'll get to that when we come a little bit later in hour number 1. It's 3 and Out on the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. It is 3 and Out on this Monday. Kevin Thomas, BJ Bennett here with you. Ben will be back with us tomorrow on the show. We'll look at what Kirby Smart had to say about the proposed 12-team playoff. Also, Jamie Chadwell at Coastal Carolina. So, two varying perspectives of the college football playoff proposal that are out there. But first, let's talk some college football. Looking ahead to 2021, which obviously fall practice starts in about a month and a half, BJ. So looking forward to that. We're going to do a little better, worse, or push. So I'm going to give you a college football unit. You tell me if you think it'll be better, think they'll be worse, or obviously if you push, they'll be about the same. So Alabama's offense lost a lot to the National Football League, but it is Alabama where they have recruited like nobody's business. Better, worse, or are they about the same?
I'm gonna say a little bit worse, and I feel bad saying that, but you look at the standard. I mean, it was amazing a year ago. Alabama scored 84 touchdowns last season. The second team in that category scored 69, so they were unstoppable. And you talk about Devonta Smith winning the Heisman Trophy. Not just that, but you had 5 first-round picks on offense alone. I mean, you only have 11 starters on offense. Not all of them are even draft eligible. And you had Mac Jones, Najee Harris, Devonta Smith, Jalen Waddle, Alex Leatherwood, I think all go in the top 20. And then you had Landon Dickerson go in the second round. So I think, and a change at coordinator. So because of that, it's still Alabama. They're going to be one of the best, but I'll say a little bit worse this fall.
Again, when you talk about all-time great offenses, I guess nowhere to go but down, especially losing so much talent to the National Football League. What about a team we'll see in the college football opener, Clemson, on defense? Better, worse, or the same?
I think better. They were really young up front a year ago. You think about Brian Bresee at defensive tackle, Murphy at end. Those guys were freshmen. And you bring back, Skalski and Spector and Henry and some big-time players. And even though you lose Darion Kendrick, I mean, Booth is being projected as a first-round pick at corner potentially. So I think you're probably going to have one of the best defenses in the country. Your top 8 tacklers return. So I think Clemson's going to be really good, and it's going to start up front once again.
And they'll need it to show up huge in week number 1 there against Georgia. Speaking of the Bulldogs, BJ, what about that Georgia defense? Better, worse, or same?
I think better. And I think the front 7 is as good as you have in college football, right up there potentially with Alabama. And I know you have some questions in the secondary, but some big-time transfers there. But that front 7, I mean, Jordan Davis is a superstar. He's the starting point. Adam Anderson, Nolan Smith, Nakobe Dean. I mean, big-time stars along the front 7. I don't know how you run the football on Georgia. That pass rush is coming. They're going to win the line of scrimmage. And then Darion Kendrick, I've told you guys, I think he's one of the 3 or 4 best corners in the country. And not only do you get him coming in, you get him with championship experience as well. Tyke Smith, I mean, you look at the roster, there are 5 stars everywhere. There are big-time proven playmakers everywhere. I think there's familiarity. So I think Georgia's going to be better defensively.
Yeah, again, we'll see them on display against DJ Uiagalelei there in week number 1 as well. What about North Carolina on offense? They obviously have one of the better quarterbacks in all of college football, but lost a couple of running backs. What about Mac Brown's offense there at UNC?
I'm going to say a little worse, and I say that understanding that Sam Howell is there. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the country. We all know that. I mean, what he did right away. I go back to that game as a true freshman against Miami, right away out of high school, and you're looking around going, wait a second, what? Converting like 4th and 17s and driving down the field. He's special. And here's something else to keep in mind, and I don't want to contradict my own point, but North Carolina returns all 5 starters on the offensive line. Now, where I get a little bit concerned, not that North Carolina won't be good, but just there may be some questions compared to a year ago. You lose 2 1,000-yard rushers, not 1, but 2, and Javonte Williams and Michael Carter, and then 2 big-time playmakers at receiver as well, and Diami Brown and Daz Newsome. So you got a lot to replace in the offensive backfield, a lot to replace on the perimeter. So I'll say a little bit of a step back.
All right, going back to the SEC, what about Florida there on defense? I know a lot of people excited about Emory Jones and what Dan Mullen could potentially do on offense, but what about their defense and what they're going to be able to do there?
Yeah, a lot returning, and it seems like anytime we talk about Florida's defense, just even in a show meeting, we get like a 10-minute back and forth with everybody talking about Todd Grantham, and some criticisms there in terms of how they finished the year and some of their struggles in certain situations. But I do think,
Third down.
right. So I do think Coach Grantham will make adjustments. I think there's a lot of talent there. People are talking about Miller and Elam as being All-American type players. So I do think Florida will be better defensively. Keep an eye on that group.
All right. Auburn, different scenario, new head coach coming in, Mike Bobo coming in to run, or I guess co-run the offense there in Auburn. Is that a unit that's going to be better? Are they going to be worse as they go through the transition, or kind of about the same?
Really difficult. Any question about Auburn is tough because whatever you think, it's probably going to go in the other direction. And that's been true forever. I mean, when Auburn's expected to be good, they struggle. When people are looking past them, they're really good. I'm going to say push for right now because I don't know. You have a coordinator change. I think Mike Bobo has the potential to stabilize things, but what's going on at the quarterback spot? I don't know that anybody knows what to expect from Bo Nix. I think Tank Bigsby is going to be a star, but you have some questions along the offensive line. So I think there are some reasons for optimism, some reasons for uncertainty. So because of that, I'm just kind of in the middle here.
And then you talk about the Cinderella that was BJ last year in college football. Coastal Carolina got their quarterback back, got a big-time tight end coming back there in Myrtle Beach, or Conway, excuse me. Are they better? Are they worse? Or are they about the same?
I think the potential to be better. And it was interesting, right? When we had Jamie Chadwell on the show last week, he told us that Grayson McCall, the quarterback, played some games last year with a broken thumb, I think is what he said on the show. And I did not know that. And keep in mind that McCall was also a freshman. So you would naturally expect your quarterback to take a step forward with some experience. And then you consider the possibility of him, hopefully being healthy for the whole year. That's a big time difference maker. And then, it tied in. I know Ben's a huge fan of this guy. Isaiah Likely is ESPN's preseason first team All-American tight end. One of those guys like Ben that could, stretch the field 15, 16 yards per catch. You do have to replace CJ Marable at running back, but you return 10 starters. I mean, your offensive line was great last year. You should be great there. Playmakers out wide, a dual threat quarterback that's proven. Now, does that necessarily mean they're going undefeated and going to be in the top 10? I don't know. That's tough to replicate. And Coach Chadwell was talking about that. But with 10 starters back and a freshman quarterback, now with some experience, I think I'm okay saying better. I mean, any disagreement with any of that, Kevin?
No, I think you were obviously pretty well spot on. I'd look at Alabama's offense. That might be one I have a slight disagreement. You said, hey, you think they'll be a little worse? I don't know. I just think if you look at Alabama play, I think that at the very least they'd be about the same, even as good as they are. They recruit so well. They have a stable of wide receivers, a highly touted quarterback, a running game that doesn't look to have any drop off. I just look at Alabama's offense and say you're probably going to get more of the same out of Nick Saban. So I wouldn't say they were going to be worse. I would say more of the same. And I think North Carolina. Could they be better? Yeah, I think the kind of fallback would be maybe they become more one-dimensional, losing not one but two great running backs out of that backfield, and maybe they have to throw it more and rely on the wheels of the quarterback a little bit more. But I think they could be. I think they could be really good. I don't know if they take a huge step back, but I could see where you could say that the concern would be maybe they become one-dimensional, a little easier to stop. Losing some of those guys out of the backfield. But yeah, Sam Howell is absolutely amazing there at quarterback. We've got more to come here on 3 and Out. Quick look at some the top returning units there across the South. But what everybody's been talking about is the proposal for the 12-team college football playoff, expected to be heard, I think today or tomorrow, by the College Football Playoff Committee, and thusly approved, and then final approval later once they get all the TV folks involved in all of that. But we got some coaches sounding off on what it could be when this thing gets enacted and kind of what it's brought to the thinking of coaches around college football. We'll get to that next. It's 3 and Out on the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Great to be here with you on this Monday. Kevin Thomas, BJ Bennett. Ben will be back with us tomorrow on the show. You can be with all across the radio network, online at espncoastal.com or Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. You can see us streaming there in studio on this Monday. A lot of folks talking about the 12-team playoff, BJ, and I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about this until it gets enacted likely in 2023. But, of course, the natural thing is, hey, this thing looks like it's going to get proposed and passed. Why? Well, because the subcommittee is made up of conference commissioners who, if they're pitching it, then that's half the battle, right there. But obviously, you're going to go get coaches' reactions to this. Let's start with Kirby Smart, University of Georgia, on Marty and McGee. He said most changes have been relatively small with the potential of what's been proposed. Probably the greatest change there's been in terms of major college football. I think that a lot of this is going to boil down to strength of schedule. For a long time now, we've been trying to build up our future strength of schedule because it's not the losses that are going to kill you. It's not playing the best teams. We've tried to go out and schedule major Power Fives across our scheduling system all the way out with the hopes that this would give us the opportunity to go and play some really good teams. And losses won't kill you when you start talking about top 12. You've got to have a powerful schedule and go play good teams. And end quote, great quote, I think, from Kirby Smart there, because that's exactly what I hope would happen. This is, to me, I guess, the argument I would use, and ironically, probably the same argument that people with the every Saturday counts would come back with. I think you're actually going to get better football out of this, right? I mean, people say, oh, the games won't mean as much. No, you're going to get better football. Look, if I know that I can go out and challenge myself, especially out of conference, because, again, I know everybody knows there's one way I can get in. Win my conference. I do that, I'm in. As long as, our conference is highly rated, which if you're in the SEC, the Big 10, Big 12 right now, you got to feel pretty good, like your conference is going to be good enough to get you in. So I win my conference. Why wouldn't you go out and challenge yourself in the non-conference as opposed to Southwest, Northeast, satellite swirl around the roundabout state? And yeah, it is. I think they won the Bourbon Bowl a couple years ago. But why would you not go out and schedule somebody that could push you a little bit and see where you stand early in the season or anywhere on the schedule, quite frankly? Because, again, we talked about this. If I'm on the committee, we're looking at things like this. We look at it in college basketball, right? I mean, if a team's 20-10 and another team's 20-10, we say, well, this team went and played in the ESPN Classic against Michigan State and Duke early in the season, split that, actually went out and scheduled, another couple of Power 5 non-conference. They went and played like maybe a Tennessee or something like that. That stuff matters when you go out and try to push yourself. So I'm interested to see that Kirby Smart is saying that they're already looking at strength of schedule in the out years when this thing comes in and say, look, it is now worth it for us to take a risk and not go schedule a paycheck school to hand out a payday to try to see where we stand.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. I do think it's an interesting and productive hybrid of philosophies. And I wrote about this on Southern Pigskin, but right, when you think about the entry to a postseason format that determines the champion, you've had a lot of people, including yourself, Kev, long say, hey, conference championships. If you're going to be in a conference, why do we have conferences? You need to win your conference. You've had others say, well, what about the overall body of work? What about what you do outside of your conference? Well, what's interesting is you create better non-conference stages and settings, I think, like you mentioned, because matchups like Georgia and Clemson might become more commonplace, and you still do have a sense of urgency. Those games matter. You want to win those games for your brand, for recruiting, and keep in mind for potential at-large berths. If you're Georgia and you don't win your conference, but you beat Clemson, you look back and say, well, wait a second. I know Alabama won the SEC, or heck, I know even Florida won the SEC, but we had a really good season and we beat Clemson. So there's still that sense of urgency, but also, to your point, it doesn't disincentivize schools for playing these games, right? Like currently constituted, Georgia playing Clemson, if we're being 100% honest about Georgia's hopes to make the playoff, is probably a bad thing this season. Because if they lose that game in week one, they're going to have to win out based on kind of what we know about the committee to get into the playoff. In the future, if they lose that game, yes, it hurts, because you don't have a win over at Clemson, but you still have a direct pathway into the tournament through winning your conference. And and keep in mind, in this scenario we're talking about for Georgia, if they play Clemson in the future, you don't have to go undefeated the rest of the way. Theoretically, and I know we're playing what-if games, but if Georgia had this schedule in 5 years, they could lose to Clemson, drop another game, but in the right scenario, still have a strong enough resume to be considered a contender, win your conference, and you're in. And I think it's a nice hybrid of philosophies, but I do think that, yes, to your point, quickly, non-conference scheduling is going to change, and with that, we're going to have to change how we interpret records, because we've been conditioned. I'm almost done, Kevin. We've been conditioned to ranking teams, all the undefeated teams, all the one-loss teams, all the two-loss teams. I think that's going to change some. You mentioned college basketball. Christian also mentioned in the show meeting in the NFL, it's not like when you do power rankings, you go, all right, all the 12-4 teams, all the 11-5 teams. College football is the only thing we do this with, and I think some of that is going to change moving forward.
Yeah, I just look at it and think that, to me, this is good for college football, because while you say, oh, well, Georgia Clemson, it just doesn't mean anything now, because you can still, well, no, it probably still does. That's probably a seeding game. You lose, you probably went from, at worst, unless you win the SEC, maybe a 7 to maybe 10 or 11. That could be a big difference when it's all said and done. Want to get the other kind of side of it as well. Jamie Chadwell, Coastal Carolina, obviously a head coach at a G5 school there in the Sun Belt, said, hey, you've got an invitation to the dance now. You actually have an opportunity. I think that's what everybody's talking about, is no matter what type of season you had, it was very slim that you ever had an opportunity. Slim to none, and Slim usually left the building. For now, you can see a pathway. And this is where it gets interesting for the G5 schools. He says, quote, you've got official visits going on this weekend, and I can look them in the face and say, if we can handle business, we have an opportunity to play for a national championship. You've never had that opportunity to say that before, and you can do that now. And I think that's good for college football as well when it's all plays out. And I agree. Thinking about wins and losses, I'll put the analogy out there this way. BJ, I heard somebody explain this to me as well about just the differences in how it's viewed in this sport. And that is the difference in boxing and MMA. In boxing, if you're a champion, you're expected to have probably no less, or no more, I should say, than one loss to be just a legit champion. If you got 3, 4, 5 losses, they're like, this guy may not be a good fighter, may not be there. Whereas you look at MMA, and even the great guys are going to have 7, 8, 9, 10 losses, get a rematch, come back, fight again. Do we look at them as a lesser champion because they lost? No, we say, look, they went and fought for it, didn't get it, came back, earned it, and got it the next time. So I think that is, to me, how what you're talking about will probably change. Is you can't just look at it and say, well, if you're not 12-0, it means you weren't good. No. Maybe you were 11-1 and played really good competition out of conference as well, and you dropped one. Does it mean you stink and you're not able to go compete? No. And I think that's the whole point of a playoff. I mean, when you look at playoffs in every sport, it is, hey, college basketball, because there's no way of knowing how Gonzaga stacks up to the ACC or SEC or the Big 12, or how the Big 10 stacks up to a Ohio Valley school, because they don't play that many games against one another. So what do? You throw them in a tournament, and guess what? 90% of the time, the cream comes to the top, right? Who was the national championship game in college basketball this year? The number 1 team in the country, Gonzaga, and a top 4 or 5 team pretty much all year in Baylor. So it's not like we somehow got a false champion because we had a multi-team tournament. I think under the 12-team scenario, who's likely playing for the championship? Probably one of the 3 or 4 of the best teams. It's probably Alabama, Clemson, Georgia, Notre Dame, or Ohio State from last year. Those are probably the teams. Now, would there have been an upset one along the way? Maybe, but one of those 4 teams, or 2 of those 4 teams, are probably going to play in the championship anyways when it's all said and done. But you still got to go out and prove it on the field.
Absolutely. And I think this is a good hybrid as well, because first and foremost, we have needed, and Coach Chadwell used the word an opportunity. You've needed that opportunity for whatever phrase, mid-majors, group of fives, whatever you want to call them. You've needed that opportunity because, Kevin, you and I have both been consistent on this point for years. I think during our whole, time talking about this, if there's no mathematical chance and no way possible at all in any scenario for you to compete for a championship, are you really FBS? Like what's going on here? So now finally we are giving those conferences and those teams an opportunity. And for SEC fans who might be saying, well, we play a tougher schedule. Well, that's why I think the likelihood is that you will get multiple at-large bids every year. I think every scenario we've seen done retroactively in terms of what the playoff would have looked like with 12 teams in the past has multiple SEC teams every year. And by multiple, I mean 3 or 4. 4 SEC teams would have been in last season using this model. So this evolution both respects the difficulty of being in a Power 5 conference, being in the league like the SEC, that is, or being in the toughest league in the country like the SEC. It respects that and pays homage to that with multiple at-large bids, with potential first-round buys, and with potential home playoff games. But it also allows everybody that's affiliated with the FBS to have a chance. And I'm with you, Kevin. If you ask me who do I think will probably be the favorite to win the national title in the first year of the 12-team playoff, probably Clemson, probably Alabama, probably Ohio State. But we don't know that, and at least there's a chance. And I've heard people say, oh, man, well, Coastal Carolina would lose to Alabama by 28 if they played. You mean like Texas A&M, who was the 5th-ranked team in the country last year? You mean like Auburn? You mean like LSU, who a couple of years ago didn't score against Alabama? Losing to Alabama by 14, 21, 28 points doesn't mean you're not worthy of competing on a national level. It means you're every other team in the country. And I also think, as we saw with Cincinnati and Georgia, as we saw with UCF and Auburn, UCF and LSU, Boise State, people are going to be surprised. There's good football everywhere, but I think the point you made, there seems to be kind of compromise accounting for various factors moving forward with this model. And I understand people who have hesitations, but I think this is going to be really good for college football.
And certainly plenty more to talk about with that as far as the playoff is concerned, expected to be proposed and approved this week by the College Football Playoff Committee, potentially to go inactive or into effect, I should say, in 2023. We got much more to come here. It's 3 and Out all across the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Good to have you along here, 3 and Out, all across the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Kevin Thomas, BJ Bennett, glad you are here making us a part of your day. Hawks tonight, we'll have it for you, 7:30. Pregame coverage, BJ Bennett with Hawks and 76ers there in Atlanta. Hawks looking to bounce back, but as we said, it seemed like game one, second half, 76ers kind of found a little something that worked, and the Hawks have not really been in it in the next two games since then.
Yeah, in the fourth quarter to game two, obviously Philadelphia was just great offensively, and something we've talked about all series. Joel Embiid is almost unstoppable. I mean, he's such a talented player, so versatile. You got to find a way to be effective defensively against everybody else, and I'll keep going back to that. I know Atlanta's got to score a little more in stretches. And not having Hunter is something that has hurt you offensively and defensively. But I think with Trae Young and everybody else on the roster, shooters everywhere, you feel pretty good offensively. I think where the uncertainty lies is on defense. And not all of that, to be fair, is on Atlanta. I think some of it is just, look, you're playing the Philadelphia 76ers. They have a top 3 player in the league, and they're going to score. But I do think it's situational defense. Final couple of minutes of the second quarter right before halftime. First couple of minutes, and you hear this in football, first couple of minutes after halftime in the third quarter. Key situations in the fourth quarter. Looking forward to seeing how Atlanta responds on defense in those situations.
Yeah, and again, we'll see what happens tonight. If they lose tonight, are they done? I mean, I know you still got another game to go, but I mean, is this pretty much the last stand if you're Atlanta at this point to try to turn this thing back in your favor?
Yeah, I mean, it'd be really tough. And you never want to count a team out, and the Hawks have been really good, and I love the energy they play with, and anytime everybody's saying they have no shot, they come out and play their best. But tonight's critical. Tonight's absolutely critical, and, you want to channel the atmosphere. You want to play like you're the team that nobody's talking about, and I think they have for the vast majority of the postseason. I still agree with what Ben said last week. All the pressure here is on Philadelphia. Atlanta has already had a very successful season. If the Hawks lose a couple of more, nobody's going to say, oh, Atlanta disappointed. I mean, the Hawks have exceeded expectations, have set a new standard for the future. All the pressure's on Philadelphia. So, yes, you're in a different spot than you were a couple of games ago, sure. But I still think you're kind of playing with house money, like we mentioned. Pressure's on the 76ers. Go out and have fun tonight and get after it.
Yeah, we'll have that for you. 7:30 with the pregame tip-off shortly thereafter this evening here, Hawks and 76ers. We've got more to come here on 3 and Out. Hour number 2, we'll take 3 right around the corner. We'll also let BJ kind of set what he would think should be some of the guidelines for the 6 non-auto bids in the college football playoff proposal. And we'll hear from Tommy Bowden in the final hour. He's a guy that went undefeated at a G5 school, and it went nowhere in terms of postseason expectations. We'll get his thoughts on now that they give him a shot. What does that mean for those G5 schools? Welcome back, 3 and Out here on the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Kevin Thomas, BJ Bennett here with you. Ben Troop out today. He'll be back tomorrow on the show, and look forward to having Ben back with us. We got so much to get to here in hour number 2. We'll look at what BJ thinks some of the guidelines should be for the non-auto bids there in the college football playoff. So look forward to that. We'll also look at could we see a matchup of two of potentially the biggest breakout stars of 21 in week 1. We'll get to that as well. And in the final hour, Tommy Bowden, 2-time ACC Coach of the Year, former Tulane head coach, who went undefeated and obviously didn't come close to being anywhere near the national championship discussion. He will join us coming up in the final hour of the program. But first, it is, what time is it? It's 4 o'clock. Let's take 3 here on 3 and Out. Now, I had to go over in a different chair here, BJ. Those who are watching on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, you see the background has changed. So I got a few different responsibilities now here in the top of hour number 2 for a little bit. So it kind of threw my timing off just for a second there.
No, I was going to say, look, man, you already know what day it is. You know what hour we're in. You're doing a great job. Yes, you're handling a couple of other things right now. Running things on a variety of different fronts. So we're with you, but you're good with the time. You're good with the day. Let's take 3.
All right, take 1. 23 years ago today, Michael Jordan hit the iconic game winner over the Jazz, Brian Russell, for ring number 6. Is that the most iconic shot of all time?
Yeah, I think it is for me, and I remember it. But you think about the layers to this, right? I mean, first off, it's Jordan. Okay, everything Jordan does is iconic. So when he hits a jumper, when he makes a shot like that, yeah, it's a bigger deal because it's Michael Jordan. And what's interesting too is that shot did not occur in Michael Jordan's prime. Jordan was 35 years old when he made that. And I think there were some who might have been saying, hey, has he lost a step or could this be where, Utah maybe moves forward and actually wins a championship with Stockton and Malone. And there's Michael Jordan with everybody in the whole arena and around the world knowing what's about to happen, being guarded by a really good defender in Byron Russell. And some people say maybe that was a little bit of a push off, but look, Jordan gets the ball. Everybody knows what's happening. The crossover, the jumper, and of course, it's Michael Jordan. It's the NBA Finals. It's money. It's perfect. And I know there are a couple of other shots you were talking about, including another Jordan shot, Kevin, the show meeting. But for me, yes, this is probably it.
Yeah, I thought about a couple. I mean, there was another Jordan shot. I know it wasn't the finals where he, Craig Elo'd the shot there at the end of the game. And I think what makes the two Jordan shots, and I know people say, well, Ray Allen, that was to send the game to overtime. Those were the first 3 that kind of came to my mind. But you look in terms of, I know John Paxson had one to win a championship for the Bulls, but those 2 Jordan shots were like there was nothing left. Like ball went in, over, ball game, see you later. I think those 2, either the Elo one, which was kind of earlier in the run for Jordan, or the one, obviously, you go out, your last shot is a splash to win a title in someone's face from the free throw line. I don't know of a better ending to any story ever that you could make. I think it's got to be that Jordan shot, best, most iconic shot, I should say, of all time. All right, take 2. Hypothetical here. If the first round of playoffs, college football playoffs, are played in the home stadium, does that then hurt the non-New Year's 6 Bowls? Because obviously that keeps some teams at home in the first round of the playoffs. And obviously more important games further up the calendar or further up in December as opposed to later.
I don't think it does. And listen, the postseason is going to continue to evolve and change, and maybe we evolve with it in terms of how we process the postseason. But for the most part, even through the BCS up through the college football playoff, you know what you're watching, right? I mean, you understand when you're watching a bowl game on December 28th between 2 7-5 teams that it's not for the national championship and doesn't have national implications, but it's college football. And it's a bowl game. And, you think about bowl games, they kind of take up, about a whole month. and you start to get them maybe in mid-December, and they go through, the holiday season, go through Christmas, go through the new year, and they're a fixture when you think about college football tradition. And of course, as you expand the playoff, it takes more of a spotlight away for bowl games, but I think there will always be interest because it's another college football game. I mean, Kev, we joke about it all the time. I mean, when we saw the bowl games expand to include 5 and 7 teams, a lot of people were saying, well, come on, you shouldn't make a bowl game at 5 and 7. Well, were you watching it? Yep. Did you know that it was nowhere near a game with national implications? Yep. Were you still watching it? Absolutely, because it's college football, and we love college football, and we love the stories. We love the players and the coaches and learning about programs that maybe we wouldn't otherwise know a lot about, seeing matchups that maybe we wouldn't otherwise see. So there's always going to be an interest in the postseason. The bowl games, of course, the college football playoff is going to have more of an appeal, but I don't care if you're talking about a bowl game on December 16th, between teams that maybe haven't been in the national polls, that maybe even aren't major conference teams, if you want to call them that, or if you're talking about a 7-5 and 6-6 team getting after it a couple of days after Christmas. People are going to watch, and we're going to know that it's not a nationally relevant game in terms of the championship, but we're still going to pay attention and we're still going to enjoy it because bowl games are an important part of college football.
I think it does hurt them in terms of, it's I think, yeah, a little bit, because the football just won't be as big, I guess, because I think even the 14 playoff diminished the New Year Six a little bit to some extent. Yeah, you watch it, but again, I think there are too many bowl games as there are. I think if maybe you see a changing and a restructuring of the bowl calendar, because I don't know about you, BJ, while it is convenient to have all your games be on Saturday, I'm sorry, if the first, second, third rounds, whatever the college football playoff are going to be on Saturday, well, guess what? I might think about moving my bowl game to Tuesday just to get away from it. I mean, it is what it is. Obviously, that's where college football schools, I don't know about the schools, but certainly networks and towns across America make lots of money off the bowl games and the crowds and advertising dollars that they bring in. But I think the playoff and expanded playoff is going to diminish everything that's not playoff. That's just, it don't matter what you do. That's just going to happen. And I think most people are okay with that. If it gives you more significant ballgame. Would you rather watch the Outback Bowl? Or would you rather watch number 6 play number 12? Or, well, I guess 5 play 12. Sorry. But, you get what I'm saying. So I think that we may see a little bit of restructuring of the bowl calendar. Maybe we see some bowl games go away. I'm okay with that, quite frankly. But I think if you're going to have fewer bowls, then they can each have kind of their own spotlight scenario where maybe you only have 2 games on a random Wednesday in December as opposed to 3 and 4, and you got one over here. No, I think it maybe gives you more focused bowl schedule during the week, playoffs on the weekend, and you get there to that champion. So, no, I think it's going to diminish it some just because that's what playoffs do. Playoffs in any sport diminish non-playoffs. What does the NCAA tournament do to the NIT? It makes it worse. It's the byproduct of what you're doing. Take 3. How significant is the crackdown on pitchers using foreign substances in Major League Baseball?
This seems to be a big deal, and I will admit this is kind of above my pay grade a little bit. I don't really understand the nuance of all of this. I guess, Kevin, the idea, right, is if you can get extra grip, you can throw, I guess, a more a breaking ball that breaks more, a curve ball that curves more. You can have better control, I guess. And I don't know the history of how long this has been in the game and what's considered, I guess, kind of okay, and what's considered this is nowhere near okay. I don't know. But it does feel like this has become an intertwined part of the talking point with pitchers dominating the sport. And we've talked about this really all season for a couple of seasons. We've seen in what a great statistical season is. There was a time where batting 300 was kind of the standard, right? And if you wanted to be a really good offensive player, you had to bat 300. Now, you have really good offensive players batting 260, batting 250, batting 240. It's not out of the regular kind of weekly programming to see a couple of guys in a lineup hitting 200. You see a lot of starting pitchers, especially elite dominant guys with ERAs in the twos. What is it, Jacob deGrom? Who might be the best pitcher right now? ERA in the 0.5s, 0.6s, and I'm not talking about him particularly, but obviously when you look at Major League Baseball, this is an era where a lot of people are talking about the dominant pitching, and clearly that is about the evolution of pitchers. Pitchers are throwing harder, they have nasty stuff, but I think there are. And we've seen, certain players involved in this conversations. When you talk about pitchers dominating, yes, you talk about certain guys, but then you have some who say, well, are these substances a more regular thing across the sport than people realize? And it was not something that was on my radar, Kevin, quite frankly, a couple of months ago. And now it seems like you're seeing it in regular conversations about pitching, about baseball. And it seems like this is something that baseball is taking very seriously.
Well, it's been around as long as somebody figure out how to manipulate the baseball. I mean, in one way, shape, or form. So in some respects, I see what Garrett Cole was trying to say. It was a horrible answer, by the way. But you can say, well, some of this stuff's been going on in baseball forever. Yeah, I mean, you can go back to the 19 teens and 20s and hear of guys doctoring up baseballs and Vaseline and spitballs and all that kind of stuff. So it's been going on, but I think what finally was the straw that kind of, broke the camel's back is that you had several players come out and say, look, like, we all know that they're cheating. Like, we can all see it. It's just nobody ever says anything. And I think that's the part that started to change the conversation around this was that, look, we know a bunch of dudes that are doing it, but you just aren't saying anything about it. Like, you can clearly see them. Hey, they go to the belt every time, or we have a guy, I think there was a case of a guy in Milwaukee. They looked at him after every pitch. He's going to the ring finger inside his glove every single time with his pitch. And then they went and looked at his stats. Fastball rate has come way up. Spin rate on his breaking pitches go from like the 50th percentile in Major League Baseball. Now he's in the upper 80th percentile of spin on his pitches. So you can't say that it's not working and not making a difference. So, and this dude was having a fantastic year. So, I mean, I think it's one thing that, I've heard commentators say this. This is going back more than just the last couple of months where guys are saying, look, we all know the pitchers are cheating, just nobody says anything about it. It's like the broadcasters say, yeah, we know guys are going to the glove and doing things that they can do to get an edge. We just don't say anything about it. And now baseball's starting to crack down. So I'll be interested to see if there's a rise in hit batsmen after this because of lack of control potentially, or if they truly crack down on it, if we actually start to see, heaven forbid, more balls put in play, even if they're for outs as opposed to strikeouts, which consistently over the last couple of years, I think we're in some kind of string of like 5 of the last 6 months of professional baseball. As a collective, we have seen more strikeouts than hits. And that's like the first time that's ever happened in the history of baseball where you see more strikeouts than hits. And it's all happened within the last 2 years. I think it was the first time happened maybe 4 or 5 years ago where it happened one time and people said, wow, we had more strikeouts than hits in a month. Like, dudes really don't care about striking out. And now it's just continued to get worse where it's either launch angled for a home run or a double, or you're striking out and going and sitting down. And I don't know that Major League Baseball wants that necessarily to be their product. Like, home runs are nice, but if it's that or nothing and go sit down, well, that's not a very exciting game to watch either at the end of the day. So I think it's good that Major League Baseball cracking down on it, and we'll see if it has a tangible change in how baseball is getting played out there night in and night out. That's take 3. We do it each day at this time. One of the questions we asked there about the playoffs, we'll get to what BJ thinks some of the guidelines should be for the non-auto bids. Very important how those will be determined. We'll break that down next. It's 3 and Out on the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. It is 3 and Out all across the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Kevin Thomas, BJ Bennett, glad you were with us on this Monday. College football playoff, obviously very much on the way. Got to get approved this week is expected. And then, of course, it goes to the media folks and scheduling and all that before it gets final approval, how it will go. But obviously, BJ, I know you want more rigid, kind of well-structured out, so we know what we're talking about, guidelines for the selection process. And really, some of it should be pretty simple with the auto bids. Hey, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, highest rated ones, not the Power 5 plus one, the highest 6 rated. I mean, could there be a potential where a Sun Belt team and a Mountain West team are higher than a Pac-12 team and they get the 6 auto bids? It's possible, but the top 6 get auto bids. How do you get the next 6 will be very interesting. And how do you kind of slot them will be very interesting as well, BJ. What do you want to see? And we'll let you kind of play Commissioner Hancock here. You can set the guidelines. What would you like to see be the case for those remaining 6 slots?
Well, here's the thing. And when you think about the new college football playoff, you are right. Half of it is not up for discussion in terms of the bids. 6 of these teams, you know what the deal is. They've already told you, assuming this is approved. But what's interesting is, even though half of the new format is going to be already decided in terms of qualifications, we still will have more at-large bids than we did. Right? In the current playoff format, we have 4 at-large bids. In the new playoff format, theoretically, we will have 6 at-large bids. Well, as currently constituted, Kevin, every November, do we and every other show in the country not debate, well, what do we mean by 4 best teams? Well, if we don't know what 4 best teams mean, how are we going to know what we mean by 6 best teams in an at-large format where, in theory, some of the, quote, top teams may already be locked in by conference championships? So I think in some ways it kind of becomes more vague and more abstract. And I guess before I can provide the answers, I have to provide the questions. And what I'm asking is, what are we looking for? And you know that I think that phraseology matters. Are we looking for the quote unquote best teams? Okay, well, if we are, what do we mean by that? Do we mean best record? Do we mean best talent? Do we mean team from the best conference? Do we mean eye test? Are we going to refer to some sort of formulaic data set? I think it's got to be a hybrid. And to me, why I get a little bit nervous about the eye test, and it's really something you've talked about for years. And before I say this, I obviously think the SEC is the best conference in college football, but I do think you can be a little, I guess, subjective with the eye test sometimes, where if you watch a game and LSU beats Mississippi State by 7 in a close game, Kevin, you know this, what's the obvious reaction to that game?
That's just SEC, man. Every week, it's just brutal.
It's the SEC, and maybe some of that is true. Maybe even most of that is true. But then when North Carolina beats NC State by 7, we go, oh, man, North Carolina stinks. And it's like those are some of the kind of frame of reference subjectivities that worry me a little bit. And yes, that changes year to year. But when I hear people say, oh, man, it's just the eye test, I'm a little bit worrisome of that, because I wonder how much of the eye test takes into account sort of preconceived notions and distinctions that may have been true at one point, may even be true now, but may not be true to the extent that we feel like they are. So I guess my question is, and I know you went to me for answers and I'm coming with questions, but I guess my question would be, because we don't know what we're dealing with yet, is what are we looking for? And to the point you made when promoting this, hold on. To the point you made about promoting this, how do you compare a 10-2 Auburn against an 11-1 Miami? How do you compare a 10-2 Texas to a 12-0 Coastal Carolina? And I know some of these questions may drive people crazy, but I've never really heard answers, Kevin. I kind of don't exactly know the specifics of what we're looking for.
Well, I think that's where, to me, strength of schedule comes into play in a big, big way. And I know human polls have a good degree to do with that, of how we view some of these teams. But I think we all know good teams when we see them. At least I say we do. But I look at a lot of times, BJ, it's of how are we viewing these teams as well? Because we've seen teams ranked in the top 10 have a horrible season and they end up at 6-5 or 7-5 rather. And you go, man, that really wasn't a good win. But at the time, you go back and say, well, they beat a number 10 ranked team who at the time everybody thought was really good. So I guess it would that's why I do like the fact that the College Football Playoff Committee doesn't even put out like an initial rankings until we're already like 8 weeks into this thing. So it kind of, at least it should in their mind, eliminate some of the preseason hype, whatever you want to call it.
Can I ask you a question about some of the frame of reference stuff? Because I understand what you're saying, and I want to be clear. I do think playing in the SEC is different than playing in other leagues.
But it shouldn't be a hall pass either.
Right. Well, here's what I'm asking about strength of schedule, because even when we talk about strength of schedule, I'm not sure we know what we're saying, because that last season I was writing and tweeting and talking a lot about, hey, we need to pay more attention to Coastal Carolina. And I wasn't saying they deserve to be a top 4 team. But the fact that everybody just scoffed at the notion of them even being considered as a national contender, I thought was unfair. And if you look at Coastal Carolina last year and you're kind of identifying them, right, sort of without looking at the name of the program, and you say, okay, what are the outline bullet points of Coastal Carolina's resume? Well, Coastal Carolina had a top 10 win. But to your point, if we say Coastal Carolina had a top 10 win, are people going to respond and say, yeah, but it was BYU?
I mean, I guess they very well could at the end of the day. I just look at it and say, I would like to see the committee not even evaluate this until we're 8-9 weeks in. I think you have to give a realistic shot to your rankings. Like when you look at your rankings, it is, hey, are we putting these guys in an order where if we pick the playoffs today, we are willing to say, and maybe there's not going to be with the auto bids, but are we willing to say number 11 is probably 11 or 12 seed at best? Like that's why we put them there. Given that, you may have somebody who's one of the top ranked conference champions who's not, you see what I'm saying, who's not right there behind him, who may be 13 or 14 or something. So I think I would like for them to hold true and say, look, if we rank this thing, we would go by our rankings, i.e. it's easy. It's not that easy, but it is easy. Hey, we put out the final rankings. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 are off the board. If those are off the board, who hasn't been chosen yet? Highest ranked team all the way down to 12, who remains? And to me, if you did your ranking truthfully, it shouldn't be that hard. But, I mean, again, you're dealing with a human element. I understand what you're saying is like people define things different ways. I think, yes, certain conferences, SEC, Big Ten, probably going to have some teams receive a little bit extra benefit because of who they're playing week in and week out. Were there years where if you won the SEC East, you could beat your chest and say, we won the SEC? I mean, I don't know that you could, because the bottom half, the bottom 4 or 5 teams are really bad. You may have had one good win in the SEC East. Now, has that changed year to year? Yes, it absolutely does. I think you have to account for parity when you look at some conferences like the ACC. Yeah, those teams record-wise have not been consistent. And I think the ACC does themselves no favors when they don't perform well in bowl games at the end of the year. But I would at least look at it and say, do we have a preconceived bias here? We've had 7 different conference divisional champions out of that side in 7 years. So are we evaluating it from a parity standpoint, and maybe they truly are beating up on each other? Or are we looking at it and saying those teams aren't very good? I think that's, to me, the nuanced kind of discussion that we don't hear from behind the scenes that I think could ultimately determine who gets ranked 11, 12, maybe even 10 in that scenario. Because to me, I think by and large, outside of the top 6, the first 10 teams, to me, I think most people aren't going to complain about too much. It's 11 and 12. And like I say with college basketball, if you're 13 or 14 on the outside looking in, you probably don't have a whole lot of legs to stand on as to why you should have been in there. If you're making the case, we should have been 12 and we were 13. It's like,
yeah, I mean, Kev,
you had multiple opportunities to find your way into this thing, from winning the conference championship to obviously playing a little bit better in the regular season, and you might have found your way in. So I have less sympathy for those discussions at the end of the day.
I guess a team that would sort of be an example of what I'm talking about in terms of we say this is what we want, but is it ultimately going to be reflected is like Louisiana, for example, last year, right? Louisiana is not in a Power 5 conference. They are in the Sun Belt, and we'll see how that sort of evolves moving forward. But if you look at Louisiana's season last year, and you made an interesting point about how do you view a win? Do you view a win against an opponent through the context of where they were ranked at the time, or do you view a win over an opponent based on how that opponent ends the season? Because we've talked about this before. Louisiana opened 2020 with a win over Iowa State, 31-14 in Ames, okay? Iowa State at the time was ranked number 23 in the country. Iowa State moved to as high as number 6 in the national polls. They played in the Fiesta Bowl, and they finished in the AP top 10. They finished number 10 in the playoff poll and number 9 in the AP. Louisiana beat them at home by 17 points. So if you were to go off and rank who had the best non-conference wins in the country last year, Louisiana unquestionably had one of the 3 or 4 best non-conference wins in the country last year. They beat a team that was in the national top 6 and made the Fiesta Bowl by 17 points in their house. If you go and look at the rest of Louisiana's schedule, their only loss came to an undefeated team on a field goal as time expired. So my question is, how do we view a team like that now, and how do we view a team like that moving forward? Again, kind of blind taste test this thing. Take Louisiana off of it. This is a team that beat a team that was in the national top 10 by 17 points on the road, and their only loss came to an undefeated team as time expired. I'm not, saying this isn't a good bowl game. Obviously, all bowl games are special, but Louisiana, with that one loss to Coastal Carolina, went to a bowl game on December 26th. So and weren't considered, for a New Year's Six or a top tier kind of high profile bowl game. So my question is, when you have a team like Louisiana, do we even view it a little bit differently if they beat Iowa State compared to if Notre Dame were to beat Iowa State by 17? And do we look at a loss? And do we look at a loss to Coastal Carolina? And even though they're undefeated and ranked in the top 8, still in our minds go, yeah, well, it's Coastal Carolina. Those are the questions that I don't know the answer to. I
think there will be weight, obviously, given to the Power 5 schools. I mean, it's already done now. I can't imagine that that's going to change, right? I mean, it is. Will the G5 have access? Yes. I think for starters, having more than 2 of the 12 might be a pipe dream. Maybe even having more than 1 of the 12 initially out of the gate might be too much of a pipe. I think you kind of have to see how that evolves over time, because I do think the more you see a G5 school represented, if they win, recruiting might change a little bit, and maybe you give a second look as to how their conference is faring that they come from, i.e., again, do we have a school coming from a mid-major conference that's playing a bunch of teams that are 6 and 5, or do we have a school that's a champion of, say, like what happened with the Sun Belt last year, where you had multiple teams who had 1 or 2 losses at the top there, and you had wins against those teams? To me, that has to carry more weight than, say, if a Boise State did it and their best win in conference was against a 7-4 team or 7-5 team. I think that
all I'm saying, and I agree with what you're saying, but I've heard you say this for years. All I'm saying is I can both clearly acknowledge that the SEC is the best conference in the country, and it's by a substantial margin, but also just solely relying on the eye test makes me a little bit nervous, because I think there are going to be preconceived notions where even when it's a Louisiana winning at Iowa State by 17, our response will immediately be, yeah, but. And if that's our response, you're kind of the eye test isn't always being fair.
It's kind of where we're trying to find the happy middle ground, right? Because what's the most college football fans? We don't like the computers because they're not human, and we don't like the human poll because they're human. So I mean, that's where we're at. As you're trying to find a mix of both. Can you take enough data to come up with a rational poll that makes sense? And Again, we got 2 years to figure this thing out and kind of see where because you don't think, listen, what's the first thing that's going to happen December 5th at 9:06 or whenever the last conference championship game is on? They're going to say, well, if this is 2 years from now, this would be what your playoff would have been. Like, it's going to happen. So you already can kind of get an early gauge of how they're shaping it now before you even get to it 2 years down the road, where before with the BCS, we kind of went off computers and then we were shifting into a human poll. You kind of didn't have that foresight. I think you're going to get some interesting foresight over these next 2 years, because the first thing everybody's going to do, conference championships are over, final college football playoff rankings are out. How does it look? Get the top 6 out of there. Now, according to their poll, these are the next 6 that would be in. Is that how it would actually turn out? Those questions are going to be asked. It's going to be a lot of fun to follow as well. We've got more to come. It's 3 and Out. Could we see a matchup of 2 ready to emerge stars in college football in week 1? We'll get to that next. It's 3 and Out on the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Great to be here, Kevin and BJ. Ben will be back with us tomorrow here on 3 and Out. Could we see a great matchup in week number 1? BJ, PFF has put out their top 25 breakout candidates for 2021. And 2 players that are in their top 3 are going to see each other in the first week on September 4th when Georgia and Clemson collide. Number 1 breakout candidate for 2021, DJ Uiagalelei. I think that's pretty much an easy one. He had a great game against Notre Dame. Big, huge linebacker at quarterback. The next Clemson quarterback probably going to be a big star. I think that's the easy one. Number 3 was Adam Anderson of Georgia, who might be trying to get in DJ Uiagalelei's face on September 4th to start the season. So a chance to see 2 of potentially the next big stars in college football squaring off against each other in week number 1. How big will each of those guys be for their teams in that opener?
Well, it's going to be an incredible matchup. You know, people are already talking about the game, and for good reason. I mean, it may be the game of the year when you think about the regular season in college football, and it could be a matchup we see again potentially. But yes, DJ Uiagalelei is probably already a star. What he did in that Notre Dame game against that team, that stage. I know Clemson lost, but he obviously had the Tigers right there scoring in the high 30s and threw for over 300 yards, the touchdowns. I mean, had a great spring game. Has had a great offseason. I think Uiagalelei is going to be one of the stars of college football. And then Adam Anderson, probably already a star in some respects as well. He was 4th in the SEC in sacks last year. And I know, understandably, Azeez Ojulari got a lot of the headlines, but I think Adam Anderson is one of the best pass rushers in college football. So you're exactly right. I think job number 1 for Anderson in some respects in that opener is, hey, man, you got to pressure Uiagalelei because if he has time back there, Georgia's still got some inexperience at cornerback. They're going to have to find a way to pressure the passer, and Anderson will be there with Nolan Smith, obviously, and others along that front 7. But, yeah, Uiagalelei is – it's interesting, Kevin, because he's a guy that has only played in a couple of games, but you're already talking about him as maybe a Heisman Trophy candidate, and I think that's fair based on what we've seen. And I do think one factor to keep in mind when you look ahead to that opener with Georgia and Clemson is, yes, DJU can throw that thing. He's got a great touch. He also has some mobility, and I know in the past quarterbacks they can run a little bit. It presented some extra problems for Georgia defensively. Uiagalelei had 4 rushing touchdowns last season. So I'll be interested to see if that becomes a kind of a part of this game where Georgia has an incredible front 7. It's going to be really difficult to line up in the power I or line up in the shotgun and do kind of your traditional running games. Are you going to be able to, or running plays? Are you going to be able to move the ball against the Dogs? Well, I'm not talking about design plays. I'm saying, what about on a play where Clemson has a design pass? Uiagalelei is the type of guy that can run, move the sticks, especially in the red zone, be an option in the running game. So that's something I'm looking forward to there. But yes, both of those guys are set to be big-time names in college football.
Sure. And again, I think what a showcase for him in week number 1 where, all of college football going to be watching Georgia and Clemson there in Charlotte, kind of bring us back to big-time college football. I think we saw shades of a little bit with the national championship, but obviously, everywhere you're talking now is, full capacity, and that's what I think people just absolutely dream of when they talk about getting college athletics or college sports back to normal is a game like Georgia-Clemson, top 5 matchup in Charlotte to start the season where it will be absolutely packed and the eyes of the college football world will be watching their week 1 right out of the gate. And again, we see 2 just huge potential stars on the rise right out the gate. Who are some guys I know, obviously, we'll get more into this as we get farther into the preseason, but who are some guys here in the next minute or so that you can come up with that you think are just poised to have breakout seasons that maybe we're not talking about right now, but by season's end, we'll be like, yeah, that dude has come a long way and is really, really good.
Well, for me, it's a guy you mentioned earlier in the show, and that's Florida quarterback Emory Jones. When you talk about quarterbacks in the SEC, right, you obviously go to, Matt Corral and JT Daniels and, Alabama, Bryce Young's going to be huge. What's going on with the quarterback battle at LSU? And Bo Nix has had a couple of years. And then there are some young guys you're looking at. And it's like, oh, yeah, Emory Jones. Well, yes, you're stepping in for Kyle Trask, who had a huge season, and you're obviously losing some key playmakers, including the highest drafted tight end in the history of the NFL draft, in Kyle Pitts. But I think Jones has really, shown a lot of promise in his couple of years in Gainesville. I think he is poised to be a big-time playmaker. And Ben mentioned this. You think about the guys at Florida that Dan Mullen has had at quarterback. Those weren't players that he recruited. Now, granted, Franks was very successful. Obviously, Trask, a Heisman Trophy finalist, was very, very successful and drafted in the second round of the NFL draft. But I think when you look at some of the quarterbacks that Dan Mullen has had, Dak Prescott, Nick Fitzgerald, you're talking about guys that are probably more dual threat. And Emory Jones has a great touch on his downfield passes. I think he's a player that can obviously run the football and move the sticks on the ground. So I'm interested to see what Florida's offense looks like. And I think Jones is going to have a huge year. And I've been consistent with this, Kev. I think people are overlooking Florida. We talked about their defense earlier in the show. I think that unit's going to be better. I think Jones is going to be better than people think. Really excited to see him get the opportunity to be that full-time starter. So when I think about breakout players and breakout players at the quarterback position, man, in the SEC, Florida, Florida every year is one of those teams you expect to be there, but it seems like this season they're not getting quite that hype. I think Jones is going to be really good, and I think he's going to be a reason why the Gators are one of the contenders in the SEC.
I think there's, again, a lot of folks who are maybe even opted out last year who are back in the game here in 2021 have a chance to come back on our radars here once we get back to full go in 2021. We got more to come here on 3 and Out, including look at Kirby Smart sounding off on a 12-team playoff. What will this do for just the competition level of college football in terms of scheduling? Will it actually happen, or is it a lot of bluster and talk here way out in front of this thing? We'll get to that. Braves, they're bad. And the Hawks trying to stave off one game closer to elimination if they can win tonight against the 76ers. And Tommy Bowden going to join us in the final hour as well. It's 3 and Out on the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Great to be here on this Monday, Kevin and BJ. Glad you are with us. We'll look at college football playoff expansion through the eyes of Kirby Smart and Jamie Chadwell, some of their comments they made about college football's expansion. And will we actually see some of this come to fruition in terms of scheduling? And will strength of schedule matter as much as maybe these coaches think it will at the end of the day? We'll get into that. Also, Braves and Hawks. Braves coming off a rough weekend. Hawks coming off a rough weekend as well. Friday night didn't go well against the 76ers. They try to bounce back tonight. We will have that for you at 7:30, and Tommy Bowden will join us in the back half of the final hour, former Clemson, and more importantly for our discussion with the Tulane coach about the playoff and maybe some of the access it could provide to those G5 schools as well. So looking forward to that conversation with Tommy Bowden in the final hour.
Yeah, and you look at, obviously his success at Clemson speaks for itself, but you look at in 98, his team with Tulane that went undefeated, they finished number 7 in the country. And Kevin, you've said this a couple of times, and it's right. They were top 10, top 7, top 8, but they were nowhere near having a chance to compete for a national championship. And we'll see if those realities change moving forward. It looks like that's going to happen. That 98 team, just so folks know, when undefeated in the regular season, played a very good BYU team in the Liberty Bowl, but did not get a chance to play, one of the Power 5 conference, national contenders, so to speak, in 98. And they beat a very good BYU team who won a national championship in the 80s, beat them in the Liberty Bowl, finished undefeated, had a really good team, probably one of the top G5 or mid-major teams ever. So yeah, Coach Bowden's got a good perspective on this, and it'll be interesting to see what he thinks.
Certainly looking forward to having him on as well. And again, Braves and Hawks in action tonight. BJ, you and I talked about this earlier. Probably, their last stand, if you will, because you're at home. Got to try to get one back in the win column, where you're down 3-1 in a bad way, and not a lot going in your favor at that point. Really, since the second half of game one, it's been all Philadelphia 76ers. I think in game one, you happened to be up by so much they couldn't come back. You got outscored by 16 points in the second half of game one. It's been blowout city ever since then.
Got to be more consistent defensively. I think that's where it starts for Atlanta. And Cody's talked about this. What prompted their turnaround during the regular season? Dramatic improvement on defense. So that's where you got to get better. Got to find some stops, especially when it matters most.
Certainly. We've got more to come, as I mentioned, in the final hour. If you missed any portion of the show, ESPNCoastal.com. You can go there, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, go to our YouTube page, and you can get a podcasted version of the show each and every day. If you happen to miss it, you can go back and watch it online or listen to it online as well. Busy final hour coming up around the corner. Don't go anywhere. It's 3 and Out all across the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. You can hit us up on Twitter as well at Pigskin Radio, at Pigskin Radio. Tommy Bowden coming up in about 35 minutes. It is 3 and Out on this Monday. Kevin Thomas, BJ Bennett. Ben will be back with us tomorrow on the show. And certainly as we go throughout the week, there's going to be a lot of talk about the college football playoff as the playoff committee expected to approve a proposal for a 12-team playoff. It's obviously probably won't get finally approved until you get into the fall and TV networks get their hands in it. But a couple of coaches, we got some quotes from BJ talking about this thing. This is Kirby Smart on Marty and McGee this past Saturday, ESPN Radio, who said, look, I think a lot of this is going to boil down to strength of schedule. And where he's probably talking about there is the non-conference champions. You're talking, let's say it was Georgia and Texas A&M and Texas and Oregon and Penn State who aren't in there, who played a tougher schedule. It might determine how some of this breaks down. But he said, I think a lot of this is going to boil down to strength of schedule. For a long time now, we've been trying to build up our future strength of schedule because it's not the losses that are going to kill you. It's not playing the best teams that will come back to bite you. We've tried to go out and schedule major Power Fives across our scheduling system all the way out with the hopes that this will give us the opportunity to go play some really good teams, and losses won't kill you when you start talking about top 12. You got to have a powerful schedule and go play good teams. And I'm sorry for all the every game matters, folks. I will take Georgia and West Virginia week 4 over Georgia and Gardner-Webb, even if it, quote, doesn't matter who loses, because it does matter who loses in terms of seeding, in terms of strength of schedule. And I would rather see that than Georgia go play Charleston Southern and win 72-3. I mean, so to me, that's a more than fair trade-off if you're talking about multiple teams trying to go out and increase their strength of schedule quotient. Now, if you're a team that's rebuilding, you may not want to go out in the next 4 or 5 years and try to schedule some just really tough games. Maybe you do to try to get your program better faster. But I do think we will see the opportunities of P5s playing P5s become greater, which may in turn, BJ, hurt the G5 access. But if you have some consistent G5s like Boise State, your Louisianas, it may actually prove to be beneficial for a Georgia or Florida or someone like that to go out and schedule them instead of maybe a FCS type football team to go on the calendar.
Well, I'm interested to see how the system responds. And here's what I mean by that. And we're part of the system, Kevin. My question is, for as much as everybody says, hey, we want to see these big non-conference games and we value a quality loss. Well, I look at Georgia's schedule, for example, okay? And I know this is counterintuitive. When we think about sports, it's wins and losses. It's that simple. But are we prepared to potentially value a 3-point loss by Georgia to Clemson more than a 24-point win over UAB? That's what I'm asking. Are we prepared for that as a college football community?
We should be, and if we are, we get better football games.
Right. And I guess a better example, that was an easy example, just looking at a couple of games from Georgia's schedule. But I guess a better example might be this. As we know, in addition to Georgia and Clemson, Miami and Alabama start out the college football season in Atlanta. I think a lot of people expect Miami to be pretty good, maybe top 15, maybe really good. If De'Aaron King's healthy, maybe they could be top 10. But Kevin, anytime we've brought this game up, what is the response? In office, when we're talking to experts, interviews, it's, oh boy, Miami might be pretty good, but they're going to lose by 35 in week 1. Well, here's what I'm asking. Would we rather Miami beat an FCS opponent by 24? Or are we prepared if Miami loses to Alabama, let's say, and again, I'm not saying if they lose 50-0. If they lose 50-0, that's, probably not a good thing in terms of how good they're going to be the rest of the year. But if Miami plays Alabama and loses 24-14, to me, all that says is that Miami's not better than Alabama. And I've long gotten into this with kind of the arguments about conference champions. If you're Auburn and you're in Alabama's division and you don't make it to the SEC championship game, but you finish second in the SEC West, all that means is you're not better than Alabama. You could still be the second best team in the country, the third best team in the country. So that's what I want to know. We all talk about, oh man, we want there to be these great non-conference games, but we've already started the narrative in our mind for when Miami loses. And you know what's going to happen. When Miami loses to Alabama, and I think it'll be closer than people think. Let's say Miami loses 24-14. Everybody's going to turn the page on Miami. Everybody. And my question is, when Miami's sitting at the end of the year, theoretically, at 11-1, and their only losses to Alabama, are we going to treat that loss to Alabama with more appreciation than had they played East Carolina and won by 7? Or had they played Gardner-Webb and won by 14? I question if we're really ready for that.
And maybe that's probably a fair question. But I think at least under a 12-team playoff, you don't turn the page on Miami after week 1. Again, you have to think about it differently.
No. I'm saying that's what we do now. Are we ready for that? Yeah.
I think in a 12-team playoff, you can't turn the page after a week 1 loss to a nationally ranked team, especially if you haven't seen what the end result's going to be. If that's their only loss, they may very well be playoff worthy at the end of the year. And this goes more to the intrigue of an expanded playoff. What you just said, Miami lose to Alabama now. We've played 1 game. Just push them to the side, and maybe they can come back into the discussion at best. Does that mean every game matters? I mean, I guess that first game did. The other 11 don't for Miami potentially. Under a playoff, you still have to pay attention to Miami. You still have to pay attention to a number of teams for much longer. Let
me stop you right here about this Miami argument, because I think this is an important example. Sometimes when we talk about this stuff, and even for myself, when we talk and there aren't direct examples, I lose my train of thought and I start thinking about formulas and all kind of crazy stuff. All right, let's say Miami loses to Alabama close, and then wins out the rest of the year, wins the ACC Coastal, but loses to Clemson in the ACC Championship and is sitting there at 11-2. To me, all those losses mean are that Miami's not better than Alabama and Miami's not better than Clemson. To me, Miami could still be a top 10 or 12 team, and that's what I want to know if people are ready for, because we've conditioned ourselves, right, over the years through polls to go, okay, all the undefeated teams, all the 1-loss teams, all the 2-loss teams, and in that situation, which could very easily happen for Miami this season, they would have, if things go accordingly, let's say Alabama and Clemson are 1-2 at the end of the year, Miami would have 2 losses, yes, which would probably be more losses than most teams in the top 10. But their 2 losses would be to the number 1 and number 2 teams in the country. To me, all that means is that you're not number 1 or number 2. You could be number 4, you could be number 6, you could be number 8. And that's what I'm asking is, are we ready to interpret losses the same way we interpret wins? Because right now we do not do that.
Yeah, I am. I mean, I can't speak for everybody else, but I if you think you can vote the same way you do now in an expanded playoff, I don't think that's going to work, because you have to evaluate quality losses. I know people hate that, but you have to. You do on some level have to take that into consideration. Of we have 2 losses, that team has 2 losses. Both lost to good teams. They beat nobody of consequence. This team went out and played. Their 2 losses were non-conference, top 5 opponents, top 10 opponents, what have you. I mean, we've seen it for time and time again, PJ. How many times have people said, oh, Wisconsin's 10-1? Then you go back and look, and it's like they played every North Midwestern school close to Wisconsin. They played Montana State. They've played South Dakota. They played all those, a number of teams up in that direction that they're going to beat and go 4-0 in non-conference. And you open up 4 or 5 game win streak in conference, you're at 9-0 already. And you're going, is this a good Wisconsin team? Or have they simply scheduled it up to make it look good? And I think that brings a big difference in how I would look at it if I'm a college football playoff committee. How did you schedule your team? Now, this is where the rub comes in. Jamie Chadwell saying, look, hey, you got an invitation to the dance. You actually have an opportunity. You never had an opportunity before. It was slim to none, and slim usually left the building. I get that. But if strength of schedule starts mattering, will it become harder for G5 schools, especially good ones, to get games that will help their kind of Q rating on the quality of schedule, strength of schedule stuff? I think that will be the new argument outside of the automatic top qualifier is, well, we would have had him at 10, 11, or 12, but they just didn't go out in the non-conference and do what we would have liked. Well, how do you know they didn't try? They just didn't get any games. I mean, I think that is because every time a Georgia says we're not going to play UAB, we're going to go out and play Rice or whoever, West Virginia, whatever. That's one less G5 game that they can go out and schedule, or a G5 game can go try to schedule. So I do think strength of schedule will be interesting, and I do think what will make the P5 scheduling better could hurt the G5 schools, and that they just won't be able to get enough games to really help them push forward. But the access will be there, and I think you will have one or two teams each year that will push the envelope of deserving to be there and get in, and that's where it starts. And then maybe recruiting, changes and perception changes around some of that stuff. I mean, how long ago was it that people actually started to look at Boise State and said, you know what? I can go out and play them non-conference and get, quality points for going out and playing and scheduling Boise State. I think that has changed. And you see it with a few schools out there, and maybe that pool gets a little bigger in terms of what actually qualifies as a good G5 win if you go out and schedule that. But that's the formula I don't think anybody can predict and see where it's going.
And I think that's on us too, in terms of people who talk about and write about and react to college football is, and I've heard you say some of these things for a long time, Kevin. I think you've been very consistent on this is, if you're always going to say when you beat Memphis, oh man, well, it's Memphis, well, then nothing's ever going to change. And I think in order for teams to feel like they can schedule kind of across the board, we're going to have to change the way we think about and react to some of this, right? Like if you're Georgia and you schedule Louisiana, you are scheduling a top 25 team. That is a game against the top 25 team. But where it can get tricky for Georgia, and Kevin, you know how this is if Georgia beats Louisiana by 10, what's everybody going to say? Oh man, well, you only beat a Sun Belt team by 10 points. When in reality, no. You beat a Sun Belt team, yes, but you beat a top 25 team by 10 points. And I think some of our perspectives have to change where we can't think about scheduling like it was college football a generation ago. I mean, ask Iowa State about scheduling Louisiana. Ask Georgia about playing Georgia Southern. Went into overtime, 7-8 years ago. Ask Florida. Ask teams about scheduling Appalachian State. Ask SEC teams about scheduling Memphis. Ask Tennessee about scheduling Georgia State. And that doesn't mean that you have to view a game against a Sun Belt team, even a top-tier Sun Belt team, the same as playing Clemson, but you do have to give an opponent the respect it deserves. And these teams are credible national names. And when you schedule a Louisiana, I believe Texas plays Louisiana in week 1 or week 2. That is Texas playing a top 25 team, even if Louisiana doesn't have the history of a Miami or a school like that. So I think some of this has to change. But to go back to my point that I take away from Kirby Smart's comments about the scheduling is people have long said, man, I want the better matchups. I want to see Michigan and Tennessee in week 1, or I want to see, Georgia and Florida State or LSU and Clemson or whatever. Well, if we say that, we have to react accordingly. And my question is, to go back to it, are we going to reward LSU for playing Clemson out of conference or Georgia if they lose by 3? Because I'll ask you, Kevin, what's more impressive? Playing Clemson down to the wire, maybe you lose by a play, or beating an FCS school by 24 points. I think you can make an argument that it's losing to Clemson. And I don't know if college football is ready for that.
We shall see. I think you better get ready for that, because to me, that makes for better. I will give a team a benefit of the doubt if they went out and really scheduled up and may have suffered a loss or two here or there, at least in the initial, because they're going out and trying to push themselves against the best in preparation for a playoff that will pit you against the best. So that's, again, it remains to be seen how that's going to twist, but I'm 100% in favor of seeing better non-conference games across the board for college football. We've got more to come here on 3 and Out, including Tommy Bowden going to join us in about 20 minutes, former Clemson and Tulane head coach. He went undefeated at Tulane. How would that play under a playoff scenario? We'll get his thoughts on that as well. It is 3 and Out all across the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Hawks tonight, BJ, game 4 against the 76ers. Hawks did not look good on Friday night. Not very close at all the entire time. How did they get that momentum back? Again, since game 1, second half of game 1, they got outscored by 16 in the second half, won a close ball game. Games 2 and 3, it was not even close. And now they've got to try to win game 4 to prevent themselves from going down 3-1, which is almost an insurmountable hole there.
Starts on defense, and I know that's easier said than done. I mean, Philadelphia, really talented, and you're talking about a team that is athletic. Embiid is a force that there's almost no counter for. I mean, he's so skilled, so versatile. I don't know what you do. And Clint Capella has been an amazing player for the Hawks, led the NBA in rebounding in the regular season, great shot blocker. But I kind of think you have to shift your entire scheme and focus to try to slow down Embiid. And I know this didn't exactly go well last time out, but we all sort of agreed on the show, man. I think you just do your best against Embiid and try to win the other matchups. I think that's probably more realistic. If you can do a better job with your perimeter defense, I think that'll help. The three ball is such an important aspect, not only of what Atlanta does offensively, clearly, but defensively in defending that. And you go back to the end of game 1, certainly the end of game 2, where I think Philly had over like 45 points in the fourth quarter. That's a tough pace to maintain. You got to get back to having success defensively, and I think that leads to success offensively, right? I mean, you see that in every sport, especially basketball, but if you can get stops, get rebounds, prevent second chance opportunities, I think that leads to transition points. Trae Young is very good in the half court, but in the full court kind of free-flowing, fluid game, he's unstoppable. When you have Trae Young, moving and guys on the wings setting up for three, and of course, big guys running the floor, I think it starts defensively, starts on the glass. Easier to do that kind of in theory, I understand, against Embiid, but that's where you have to get it done.
Yeah, here's kind of the problem that I see with the Hawks. And like you get into a 7-game series like this, there's no secrets, right? I mean, if you're Nate McMillan, you can't just go there and go, guys, it's not like the Disney movie. I'm going to draw something on the board. And in 5 seconds, we're all going to get it, and it's going to turn the whole series around. Like, you can't just go flip a switch and change the way you're playing right now. And maybe there's some minute adjustments out there, but again, game 3, it wasn't really even competitive, right? I mean, so what can you do at this point to stem that tide where you have just been getting rolled really since the second half of game number 1? And what do you do to counter that? Because I think you may be at the point of the series where there's nothing you can do to counter that, because you can't just pull out something magical all of a sudden and say, well, we're going to play better than we're going to do something we haven't done all year. Like, what do you do to try to take advantage early and stay there?
Play aggressive, play with confidence, and that doesn't necessarily mean shots are going to go in or that you're going to get stops. But to go back to kind of the foundational summary of the series, right? We all said, it's interesting how storylines evolve. We all said at the beginning of the series when Atlanta beat New York, oh man, amazing. Now the Hawks can just do whatever. It's been an amazing season. The future's bright. Now you just go out and have fun against Philadelphia. Embiid's good. You're probably not going to win. But look, it's been an amazing series or season. Then you win game 1 and everybody's looking around going, wait a minute. We're now the favorite in this thing. And that probably was a little quick, to jump to when you think about the season that Philly has had and how good the 76ers are. And then you lose a couple of games, and now we're all looking around going, oh boy, what do you do? And there's this sort of stressful tension around the series, at least from the outside looking in. And I don't think that's the right mindset to have. Of course, there's pressure. You're still playing in the NBA playoffs. But I think it's also important to understand that the pressure is on Philadelphia. They were expected to be here. Not only were they expected to be here, they're expected to be there in terms of the next round and maybe even beyond. If you're Atlanta, you have had a remarkable season. You're winning the playoffs over New York. Nobody expected. Everybody feels completely differently now about the future of the organization, about obviously what Coach McMillan has done, Trae Young, the role players. I think Atlanta's going to be one of the favorites in the East next year. But I think you have to be careful to start kind of looking around going, uh-oh, what do we do? There's nothing we can do, and kind of feel like you're fighting a losing battle. It's been a great year. Go out and have fun. The pressure's on Philly, man. Shoot threes. Get out there and run. Get the crowd into it. Have fun. Play with passion. And I think they are. All I'm saying is I just don't want kind of the nervousness of, Philly might have some momentum to kind of overtake the series, because I think if you're Atlanta, you should feel confidently that you can play with these guys. You've got a dub. And I'm not saying you're happy to be there. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you go out and play like the pressure's on your opponent, because that is the case. Go out and play loose, play free, have fun. Atlanta's at its best. I know sometimes it kind of drives you crazy, but Atlanta's at its best. What, Kevin? When Trae Young's pulling up for 45-foot threes and you're going, wait, what? Or when, Bogdanovich is, taking guys off the dribble, or Clint Capella's just getting after those rebounds. And yeah, you might not get back defensively as quick, but you got to crash the boards. I think you want to see Atlanta just play with passion, play with fire, have fun, go out there, play loose. And look, man, if you lose and the season ends in the second round of the playoffs, I think you can still be extremely proud of what you did.
A far cry from where this thing was heading when they were 14-26, I think.
Yeah.
20. Yeah, there's a far cry from where this thing looked to be going way back in the early portion of the season. They will play tonight. We will have it for you 7:30. So tune in. 7:30 we'll have Hawks and 76ers this evening. Braves off tonight. They'll try to get anything consistently going as they move forward. But when we return, we'll switch gears again. We're talking college football with a guy who's been around a college football family and been a part of some great teams, great seasons. Tommy Bowden, two-time ACC Coach of the Year, former Clemson head coach, also went undefeated at Tulane, finishing the top 10 in the country. What would that mean moving forward into a expanded college football playoff? We'll ask him about it when we come back. It is 3 and Out all across the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. We are streaming live, ESPNCoastal.com. Hit us up on Twitter at Pigskin Radio, at Pigskin Radio. Tommy Bowden set to join us when we return. It's 3 and Out on the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. Great to be here on this Monday. Kevin Thomas, BJ Bennett. Ben Troop will be back with us tomorrow here on the program. But certainly this week, a lot of anticipation on the approval of a 12-team college football playoff and how that could change the landscape of college football. Our next guest has been a head coach at Clemson, been a head coach at Tulane when they were undefeated as well, and two-time ACC Coach of the Year. Tommy Bowden joins us here on 3 and Out. Coach, welcome to the show. How are you?
Good, doing fine. Good afternoon.
Hey, appreciate you coming on. And you've kind of been at the top of both there. You had an undefeated season with Tulane and what is now known as a G5 school, and you've been there at Clemson out of the ACC. Last week, a lot of smoke coming out about what's expected to happen this week with a 12-team college football playoff. From your standpoint, how does this change things moving forward once this thing goes into effect?
Well, I don't know if it'll. The only thing I think it'll change is that the rich will keep getting richer. I think this will continue to separate between the Power Fives and the G5s, or the non-Power Fives. And there's already starting to be a little bit of a gap widening financially. The quality of the athlete that they're getting, facilities, all those things, the gap is widening. So I think when you go to a 12-team, most of those spots are going to go to Power 5 teams. So I think that's one of the ways that it will change. But it was bound to happen because the need for finances.
Coach, do you think this is a good thing for college football?
Yeah, I think it's you need to generate revenue. There's such a strain on college athletics financially with Title IX and gender equity, where right now you got your men's basketball and men's football supporting all the other sports, male and female. So this is going to generate more income. The COVID, I think, and the financial burden that COVID caused probably expedited the decision to go to 12. But I think it's going to be a good thing from a financial standpoint, and it's been able to help some of the Olympic sports.
This year on 3 and Out, and Coach, when you were at Tulane, had an undefeated season, finished in the top 10. If a playoff were in effect, where do you think you would have kind of landed in that, and how do you think you would have done? Because I know a lot of the argument is, well, these G5 schools, when they get there, they just don't play the type teams we do every week, and they'll probably lose by 20 points. Is that kind of a bunk argument when you get in a one-and-done situation? How do you think, in your case, Tulane would have done had you had a playoff to be a part of?
It was a little bit different circumstance then, in the fact that we were kind of on the forefront of this no-huddle, fast-paced offense. Defenses had not caught up with it like they have now. I think the year that I went undefeated, Florida State, Tennessee played. Florida State might have scored 10 points. I think we would have generated more points because of what we did offensively. Now, Florida State was down to about their third-team quarterback, and I think it was a 7 or 9 point game. But that particular year, I think we would have had a realistic chance to win simply because of what we were doing offensively. But I think those times have changed now because people have caught up with the fast-paced no-huddle offense, the zone reads, all that run pass option. So I think years ago, 1999, when we went undefeated, or 1998, we would have had a close game. Now, I think that if you have out of 12 teams, you have 9 Power 5 teams and say 3 non-Power 5, and I think in most of the participants in the Final 4 and the Final 2 will still be the Power 5 schools.
And the college football playoff has obviously been dominated by Alabama, by Clemson, by Ohio State, maybe a few others. Do you think that when the pool expands to 12, those will still be the teams playing for it all, or do you think we may see a little more parity?
Oh, you're going to see a little bit more because when you play more games, there's a percentage that you could lose instead of those 3 teams you just mentioned in Georgia or Oklahoma, whoever the 4th participant happened to be. You're going to you got a playoff game and the championship game. Now you're going to go to another round, so that the odds of them losing are increased. But I still think the major players, the ones you just mentioned, are going to be still the ones playing. But occasionally you might get a non-Power 5 jump in there, but I don't think it'll be very often.
Tommy Bowden joining us here on 3 and Out, and you look at scheduling. I know we had a quote earlier from Kirby Smart talking about, hey, the losses may not kill you. It might be who you play, or rather who you don't play potentially. Do you think we'll actually see better non-conference games where sometimes now it's, hey, give me 4 games I can win, go out and win in my conference. Maybe we drop one. We should have a chance to be in the playoff. Do you think we'll actually see teams schedule up a little better in the non-conference if that may actually be more of a quotient if they don't get in via the conference championship?
Yeah, I think you're definitely going to see the Power 5 schools not necessarily looking for 4 W's out of their out-of-conference games, or 3 to determine on how many they play. I think now, because the addition of a possible 12, its strength of schedule is going to be a factor now more than ever, because you increase the number of teams, and it's going to be who you play, not your record, like you say. The days of you playing the lower level teams and non-Power 5 schools, I think, kind of ganging up and getting 3 or 4 of those games to have wins, I think those days are over in the strength of schedule. It's always been a major factor, probably the number one factor in determining the 4 playoff teams, but now it's going to be, I think, more of a factor.
Coach, some people have said, hey, maybe if this goes through, you look at a schedule with a conference championship game, and depending upon what happens with how you're seated, could you play 15, 16, 17 games in a college football season? What are your thoughts on that? And would that add new challenges if you're a head coach?
Well, yeah, it adds more challenges on the training staff and your doctors and those, because it's basketball going to 64 teams so early, that the style of play, football being a collision sport, you have more injuries. So that's going to be the biggest factor. It's going to be the injury factor when you play more games. But the NFL has imagined to do it. I think you're going to see some of the practice routine as they get into the playoffs. It's really going to change to more of the NFL style, a lot more shorts, a lot more assignments, a lot shorter practices anytime you extend the season like that. So head coaches are going to have to get together, probably meet with a lot of NFL. They already meet. We used to always visit NFL camps anyway, just to get ideas, X's and O's. But now I think you're going to get more visit the staff, the NFL, to get more ideas on how to keep them healthy, during an extended season. But there's a smart way to do it. The NFL has faced that decision for a while. Now colleges are going to have to.
Tommy Bowden joining us here on 3 and Out. And Coach, obviously some people say, well, how do you incorporate this thing with the bowl games and who gets a potential home game in an early round? How do you think all of that gets worked out? Because I know it was kind of thrown out last week, like, hey, here's what they're talking about. People say, well, wait a minute, how can teams, potentially 5 through 12, how could half of them potentially get a home game, and then the top 4 seeds have to go play in a bowl game? How do you think all that kind of gets, merited out when it's all said and done, and what is left of the bowl structure once this goes into place?
I think it's going to hurt the bowl structure. These are the same questions. The one you're asking are the same ones we asked when it went to 4. How you don't want to jeopardize the bowls. Bowls have been so good to college football. How are you going to work 4 teams in the bowl structure? They found a way to do it. They will find a way to do it with 12. It's going to be a little more complicated, but I think by going to 12, now that we have 32, 34 bowl games, it might hurt some of those newer bowls, but the 12 bowls that get used for playoff games it's going to be a plus. And some of the other bowls will survive, but I think overall bowls have now grown to 32 or 34 bowls. I think that some of the late addition bowls will be hurt.
And Coach, we're all talking about strength of schedule, of course, and for a lot of people, the focus is on non-conference games. And I know people are fired up about Georgia and Clemson here in our state, but what about conference schedules? Whereas for a while now, we've been comparing and contrasting which conferences are the best, and the SEC versus the Big Ten, or how does the ACC kind of rank into all of it? What are your thoughts on comparing conference schedules to conference schedules, and will the committee view, say, a season in the SEC differently than maybe a season in the ACC?
Yeah, I think they definitely will, but those things are cyclical, and sometimes the Big Ten, there was Big Ten a few years ago, had Ohio State, had Wisconsin, had Penn State, and they had about 4 teams that were really, really ranked high, and at that particular time, it was the Big Ten. I think it's been the SEC for a couple of years, but you never know when to only schedule 8 or 9 conference games and go get a softer out-of-conference schedule because you don't know how strong your conference is going to be year to year. But that usually changes. It's been the SEC the last couple of years, so they might can gamble and say, hey, SEC, we might only play 9. Let's go get us a softer schedule out of conference. We can depend on the strength of schedule in the SEC. I don't know if you could do it year in, year out. They've been the winners the last couple of years, and that'd be a tough gamble. But again, right now, if your conference is strong, you could afford to play a softer schedule out of conference. But it's a crapshoot whether you gamble whether you want to test that or not.
And Coach, maybe, and that's something we debated as well, where obviously they came out with the caveats like the 6 highest ranked conference champions will get to go. Not necessarily the 6 power or just the Power 5 schools get the auto bid, but the 6 highest ranked conference champions will get to go. Do you think some leagues, as you just talked about, maybe not the SEC, but other leagues who have struggled a little bit, the Pac-12, the ACC, would they flirt with doing away with divisional play to make sure that they don't end up with, say, a 7-5 team from one division, potentially upsetting their big dog from the regular season and upsetting the apple cart playoff-wise, and just do away with divisions and pit the top 2 teams in the league against each other in a championship game?
I don't think they'll do away with divisional play. That's worked out so good, and it's been a plus, I think, for the conferences. They probably were against it when they first went to a divisional play, but again, it generates a great conference schedule with the teams that are playing. You get natural rivalries, geographical rivalries. I think when you have a division, I don't think the conferences will touch that. It might be an advantage if you could, but I think it's generated so much interest and so much competition within the conference. And I think all of the conferences have benefited from that, maybe in ticket sales and strength of the overall strength of the television market. So I don't think that will be effective.
A lot of people have speculated when talking about the conferences with the auto bids. Could Notre Dame, maybe, who's kind of been, in other sports, a part of the ACC, and obviously was a part of the ACC last year. Do you think this could influence Notre Dame, maybe to think more about the ACC, or no?
I don't know if it will. They've always had that independent attitude that we can survive on the television market because we are Notre Dame. Nothing has really happened to them to not prove that to be beneficial for them. So I think it's going to take a year or two of something happening where they look like they're qualified, but because they want to associate with the conference, it cost them. If they would have been a conference, they would have gotten the 11th or the 12th spot with a 9-3 record. Until that happens to them, I think they will continue to remain independent. If there was ever a time of them come in, I thought it would be last year, and they really didn't look like they wavered at all.
I know they get special qualifiers potentially when it comes to picking teams for the postseason. Should they get special consideration as an independent to that? I know BYU's out there as an independent. Might they be forced to go a conference route at some point too? But when you look at an independent who's kind of going out and just picking their schedule from start to finish, how do you kind of look at them compared to everybody else? So when you're obviously Notre Dame's going to get a little bit of a special look because of who they are, but how do you kind of factor that in now that you've expanded it out to 12 teams?
You mean a team like Brigham Young or Notre Dame's marketability? Which one are you talking about?
I think probably would Notre Dame's marketability outweigh some of the other things that maybe BYU would have to overcome to get in.
There's no doubt. And we started the show by talking about money and Catholicism. They're all over the world, not in the United States. And they are so marketable from a television standpoint and from a monetary standpoint. And that's what they're going to have over a team that might be more qualified and might have more wins, but it might have a little bit stronger strength of schedule. Unfortunately, the dollar and those people that make that decision, it gets into politics. And that's why I think that Notre Dame is always going to have that advantage over some of the other teams that don't struggle with that marquee name.
And Coach, finally, we talked about your Tulane team being undefeated, and what if they would have made it into a playoff, or you guys would have. Obviously, Florida State with your dad was in the top 5 every year for a decade plus. Have we had a 12-team playoff in the 90s, will we have had different results in college football, or do you think kind of whether it's a 2-team, a 4-team, or a 12-team, ultimately you'll still see the same champion, and that would have been the case throughout history?
Yeah, I think we would have, because so many years, I don't know, you know, back when Florida State was going their heyday, that they would 3 or 4 times. I don't know if you remember the wide right, the wide left, the wide those games with Miami. You know, all of a sudden, Florida State would have been in the playoffs, and those games were so close. The years that Miami did not win the national championship, Florida State probably would have if there would have been a playoff. So that's one team right there that comes to mind that there was a lot of times knocked out by a late loss to Florida, who was the nationally ranked team, or Miami. But it was more the Miami games I remember that were wide right and wide left. That and one loss kept them out of the national championship game. They would have made the playoffs and have, because they were so talented, would have had a great chance to win any of those years.
Tommy Bowden, our guest here on 3 and Out. Coach, really appreciate the time. Thanks so much.
Y'all have a good summer. Thank you.
Will do. Tommy Bowden, our guest here, weighing in on the college football playoff. We'll come back. We'll react to some of what he said there, BJ, as well. It's 3 and Out on the Southern Pigskin Radio Network. If you miss any portion of the show, you can go to espncoastal.com, go to our YouTube page, or Spotify, Apple Podcasts. You can go check out a podcasted version of the show. Tommy Bowden joined us last segment. BJ, any response to kind of some of what he said? I know you and I talking during the break disagree a little bit that there wouldn't be a lot of upsets. I don't know if there'd be a lot, but I do think there will be some. Now, is it all P5 getting upset by G5? I don't know, but I do think there will be upsets every single year you play this thing out.
I think there'll be upsets, yeah. And I mean, we were talking in the show meeting about, kind of if you would have had this proposal last year, Coastal Carolina, Texas A&M would have been, I guess, potentially the 5-12 game. And how would you have felt about that? I mean, I think these games are going to be closer than people think. I do think you're going to have upsets. Now, do I think it's more likely to have upsets kind of in round one than potentially a team that's seeded 11 or 12 win a national championship? Yeah, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be as chalk as people say. Although if you pick chalk, I mean, that would be the Kevin Thomas theory of winning your bracket challenge. But yeah, I do think there will be upsets, and you said something in the break. Until we see Coastal Carolina play a Texas A&M or Cincinnati play, a Clemson, we're never going to know.
Yeah, and again, I think that's what we're going to find out when this thing comes into fruition is how do some of these teams stack up when given the chance? Now, again, is the cream going to be there at the end? I think certainly Alabama probably going to be there, but how do you navigate the playoff bracket? Are you dominating the whole way through? Are you, potentially getting pushed to the brink by a Coastal Carolina, and then you got to turn around and play the next week and try to shake that off? Those are the dynamics I'm very interested in when it comes to a college football playoff scenario. Appreciate Tommy Bowden joining us here on the show. Again, if you missed him, you can check us out on the podcast, Apple Podcasts, our YouTube page, and more. You can hear all the comments he had to say today talking about the proposed 12-team playoff in college football. Hawks coming up later tonight, Game 4 against the 76ers. So we'll see you tomorrow, 3 and Out, Southern Pigskin Radio Network.